It was December 24th. The kind of cold that settles not just into the skin, but into the bones. Outside, the sky hung low, heavy with the promise of snow that hadn't yet arrived. Inside the house, however, everything radiated warmth. Soft golden lights weaved around the staircase. The scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air, and holiday music played gently in the background. A carefully curated Christmas playlist my mother had used for over a decade. My family had gathered at my parents' house in Santa Barbara, California, a two-story colonial-style home nestled on a quiet street, the same house I grew up in, the same walls that watched me become someone my father would later say he couldn't be proud of. I hadn't planned on staying long. I had driven up from Los Angeles mostly for my mother, who insisted this year things would be different. But Christmas with my family always carried a weight I had learned to carry in silence. The dining room was immaculate. The table, dressed in white linen, gleamed with polished silverware, and crystal goblets filled with red wine. Candles flickered in a silver centerpiece surrounded by pine cones and sprigs of holly. Everything was perfect, on the surface. We sat down just after sunset. My brothers Ryan and Matthew were already trading stories about their latest professional milestones. Ryan, the orthopedic surgeon with his new private clinic. Matthew, the venture capitalist who had just closed another $1 million round. Their wives smiled on cue, their children sat well-behaved, coached to perfection. And then there was me, the only daughter, the one who never quite followed the path they had laid out. I was seated at the far end of the table, across from my father. I wore a navy blue dress, simple but elegant. My hair was tied back. I had brought a small, carefully wrapped gift, golden paper tied with a burgundy ribbon, and placed it beneath the tree the moment I arrived. No one had asked about it. Dinner went on with practiced civility. The wine flowed. The conversations danced around safe topics. Politics was off limits. Emotions even more so. I barely spoke, instead watching, listening, until the moment my father rose from his chair. The clinking of his knife against the crystal glass was sharp and deliberate. The room fell silent. Heads turned. Eyes fixed on him. He held his glass high and spoke with the voice of a man who had mastered the art of performance. "Tonight, I want to raise a toast," he said, scanning the room with practiced affection. "To my sons, to Ryan and Matthew, who have given me every reason to be proud." A pause. He smiled at them. They nodded, awkwardly, perhaps sensing what was coming. "And as for my daughter?" My heart stopped. He looked directly at me. "She has only ever brought me disappointment." No one spoke. No one gasped. Not even a nervous laugh to cut the tension. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Final. I felt every pair of eyes drift from him to me, not out of sympathy, but out of discomfort. No one challenged him. No one defended me. Not my brothers. Not my mother. Not even myself. I lowered my gaze to my plate. I could hear the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall, counting down the seconds of my humiliation. I felt my hands tremble in my lap. But I didn't cry. Instead, I rose from my chair. Slowly, deliberately. The room remained silent. I walked over to the tree, retrieved the small golden box, and returned to my father's side. I placed the gift gently on the table in front of him and spoke with calm, emotionless precision. "A present," I said, "and a thank you." He stared at the box, then at me. His face, once smug and composed, twisted into confusion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice lower now, uncertain. I didn't answer. I returned to my seat. I watched as he tore the ribbon, opened the wrapping paper, and lifted the lid of the box. His face changed the instant he saw what was inside. His eyes, once narrowed in judgment, widened. His hands trembled. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The room leaned in, sensing a shift, something unseen, something unspoken. But I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. I sat in silence. And for the first time in years, he was the one without words. What he saw inside that box, what I gave him, changed everything. But he didn't know yet that it was only the beginning. What did I give him? And why did it make the man who never once looked at me with pride finally fall silent? My name is Anna Whitmore, and I am the only daughter of John Whitmore, a man who could build empires from numbers but couldn't offer a single word of affection to his own child. After that Christmas Eve, the image of my father opening the small golden box played in my mind on a loop. It wasn't the shock on his face that haunted me. It was the way he looked at what I had given him. Not with anger, nor pride, but with something much more disturbing: fear. He was afraid of what I had done. And more than that, he was afraid of what it meant. To understand that fear, one would have to understand the man. My father was raised on a ranch in rural Montana, the youngest of 5 sons, born to a war veteran who believed that silence was strength and softness was sin. Emotion had no place at the dinner table. Only results did. By the time he was 25, he had graduated at the top of his class from Stanford's business school and secured a junior partner role at a rising investment firm in San Francisco. He married my mother the same year, Elizabeth Carter, the daughter of a retired judge and former concert pianist. Their union was more of a transaction than a romance, though I imagine in their own way they loved each other. From the outside, we were a model American family. My brothers were athletic, driven, obedient, everything that confirmed my father's philosophy that discipline produced greatness. And then I was born. A child not of strategy, but of chance. He wanted a 3rd son. What he got was a daughter who cried at violin concerts and asked why the moon followed her home. From the beginning, I felt it. The discomfort he held around my emotions, my questions, my softness. He tolerated me, provided for me, but never invited me into his world. And so I learned early to build mine without him. At age 9, while Ryan brought home trophies from football tournaments and Matthew presented perfect math tests, I brought home a short story I had written in class. It was about a girl who lived inside a mirror and could only communicate through reflections. My mother cried when she read it. My father didn't even glance at it. He said, "What's the point?" That phrase became the anthem of my childhood. What's the point of writing? What's the point of theater club? What's the point of wasting time on feelings? When I was 15, I secretly submitted a short film to a teen arts festival in Santa Monica. It was selected. I was invited to speak on a panel about storytelling and youth identity. I never told my father. My mother came with me. She wore a blue silk scarf and said I looked just like her when she was my age. That night, when we returned home, my father saw the certificate in my hand. He didn't ask where we had been. He didn't ask what it was for. He simply said, "If this affects your grades, it ends." As we grew older, the distance between me and the rest of the family only widened. Ryan became the celebrated surgeon, Matthew the financial wizard. Their accomplishments were measured, celebrated, framed on walls. My life, on the other hand, became a topic that was either avoided or reduced to caricature. "She lives in Los Angeles now," they'd say. "She writes something." No, not books. Screen stuff, I think. But I wasn't just writing. At 27, I co-wrote an independent film that premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. It won a Critics Award. At 29, I became a staff writer for a network drama. At 31, I pitched an original series, my story, fictionalized but rooted in truth, and Netflix picked it up. The contract arrived a week before Christmas. The pilot was already shot. The footage on the flash drive was rough, but intimate. It told the story of a young girl raised in a house where silence screamed louder than violence, and how she broke that silence through the power of narrative. Inside the golden box I gave my father was that contract, printed and bound. Alongside it, the flash drive. And beneath both, a photograph. It was taken when I was 3. My father was holding me in his arms in front of the fireplace. I was laughing. He was smiling, a real smile full of life, not yet tainted by disappointment. My mother had captured that moment before things hardened. On the back of the photograph, I had written, "For the man who taught me the language of silence." I became a storyteller so I could finally speak. I didn't expect him to embrace me after reading it. I didn't expect forgiveness or understanding. But I needed him to see it. I needed him to know. because sometimes the story we write for ourselves must be louder than the one we were handed. After Christmas night, I drove back to Los Angeles alone. The highway stretched endlessly, lined with black silhouettes of trees and the fading echo of carols playing in my head. My phone stayed silent. No messages, no calls. I imagined him watching the footage, hearing the narrator speak lines that were pulled from the depths of my own teenage journals, seeing shadows of himself in the father character, watching the daughter in the story find her voice and leave. I imagined him realizing what I had done. But would he hate me more? Would he throw it away? Would he pretend it never happened? For weeks, there was nothing, not even from my mother. And then, out of nowhere, my brother Matthew texted me. It said only this: he kept the box. That was all. No punctuation, no emojis, just 5 words. He kept the box. But what did that mean? Did he keep it out of rage, out of guilt? Or because, perhaps for the first time, something inside him had started to shift? He kept the box. But why? And what would he do with the story I gave him? The story of us. 3 days after Christmas, it rained without interruption in Los Angeles. The kind of slow, methodical rain that drips from rooftops like a ticking clock. I remember sitting in my apartment, watching the droplets slide down the window pane, one after another, forming tiny rivers across the glass. Each one felt like a second passing between me and an inevitable reckoning I had long postponed. The box, the contract, the photograph, the flash drive, the silence. He had kept it, but he hadn't called, hadn't written. And then, on the first Monday of January, at exactly 8:43 p.m., my phone rang. It was my mother. She spoke in a soft, hurried tone, as if she didn't want to be overheard. He watched the pilot, twice. He hasn't said a word, but he asked me where the photo was taken. Anna, I think something's stirring. You should come this weekend. I hesitated. My first instinct was to say no. Let it be. Let him live with it, with the discomfort, with the mirror I had held up to his past. But something deeper pulled at me. Not forgiveness, not pity, curiosity. What does a man who has never apologized look like when the illusion of control starts to slip? That Saturday, I returned to Santa Barbara. The sky was clear, almost unnaturally so, and the air was cold enough to make each breath visible. I arrived just before dusk. The house looked unchanged. The porch light was on, the hedge trimmed, the mailbox freshly painted. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. A heaviness. My father was in the study, the same room where he once took calls from CEOs and investment bankers, now turned into something quieter. He sat by the window, a wool blanket over his knees, the box resting on the side table beside him, unopened but present, like an artifact in a museum. He looked older, not merely aged, but diminished, as though time had decided finally to take notice. He turned to me when I entered, and for a long moment we simply looked at one another. There was no greeting, no embrace. Just that brittle, piercing silence that had always lived between us. And then he spoke. So, you wrote a story. His voice was flat, not angry, not curious, just stating a fact. I did, I replied. He nodded slowly, as if weighing the words. Based on us. I didn't answer. He picked up the flash drive from the table, held it between his thumb and forefinger like something fragile. You made me into a monster. I stepped forward, calmly, carefully. No, I said. I made you into a man who forgot how to love. His hand trembled slightly, and he set the flash drive down. People will think it's all true. It is true, at least from where I stood. He looked away. You embarrassed this family. No, I replied. You did. Every time you made me feel small in front of them. Every time you pretended I didn't exist unless I performed according to your script. Silence again. That photograph, he said after a while, eyes still distant. I had forgotten it. I hadn't. A long pause followed. I could see his chest rise and fall, slow and deliberate. Then, in a voice more quiet than I had ever heard from him, you were happy. In that picture. Because I believed you loved me. His jaw clenched. He looked down, then up. There was moisture gathering at the corner of his eyes, but he blinked it away quickly. "Is that why you gave me this?" he asked, gesturing to the box. "To wound me? To remind me of what I failed to do?" I shook my head. "No, I gave it to you so I could stop carrying it alone." The air in the room shifted. The tension tightened, then collapsed into something worse: resentment. Not loud, but deep. My father stood up slowly, steadied himself against the chair. "You could have come to me. You could have spoken to me. Privately." I stared at him, shocked. "I tried, Dad, my whole life. But every time I spoke, you turned away. Or worse, you listened and dismissed." This, I pointed to the box, this was the only language you ever respected. Results. He took a deep breath. His eyes were no longer soft. "So this is your success? Selling our story to strangers?" "No," I replied. "This is my survival." He stepped closer. "Do you want me to be ashamed? I want you to feel something. For once." And then, perhaps the most devastating thing he could have said: "You always were the dramatic one." I felt something inside me break, but not the way it used to. No tears came, no pleading, just clarity. I walked past him toward the door and paused. "You know," I said, turning back, "the daughter in the story walks away from the father, not because she hates him, but because she finally understood that love without recognition is just a myth she's too tired to believe in." He said nothing. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and quietly made my way toward the exit. My mother was in the kitchen, holding a dishcloth, watching me with a quiet question in her eyes. I shook my head. No words. Outside, the sky had darkened, the moon already rising. I sat in my car for several minutes, the engine off, the silence around me deafening. And then I drove away. I didn't know if I would ever return. But I knew this much. I had delivered the truth to his door. And whether he opened it or buried it was now his burden to carry. What happens when the one who taught you silence is finally left alone with it? And what does it take for a man like that to admit he was wrong, not just in words, but in soul? The weeks after I left were filled with a silence so thick it felt alive, like fog clinging to the walls of a house that had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. I did not call my father. I did not return his messages, though in truth, there were none to return. I did not drive to Santa Barbara, nor did I expect anyone from that house to come looking for me. After all, I had walked away with purpose, not as a threat, but as a choice, a final act of quiet self-respect. But silence, when it is not chosen, becomes unbearable. And it wasn't long before the silence I left behind began to speak louder than I ever had. It was my mother who first broke the stillness. She called me 2 weeks after the confrontation. Her voice cautious, but more urgent than I'd ever heard it. "Anna, something's changing." "What do you mean?" "Your father isn't himself. He doesn't eat much. He barely sleeps. He sits in the study for hours with the box beside him. Sometimes I hear the audio from your pilot playing, again and again." That image haunted me. My father, the man of order, of structure, of schedules and sharp suits, reduced to stillness, replaying a fictional story that wasn't so fictional. Listening, perhaps, not as a father, but as a man seeing himself through someone else's eyes for the first time. "Has he said anything?" I asked. "He won't talk about it. But yesterday, he took down the family portraits from the hallway. He replaced them with one photograph." "Which one?" "The one from the box. You in his arms." I didn't respond. "Anna, he's changing." But I didn't believe in change, not from men like him. Change for men like him was too tied to ego, to pride, to the deep fear of being exposed. So I listened, I nodded, but I did not return. A month passed, then another. My series was picked up for international distribution. The show gained attention, especially for its raw portrayal of emotional estrangement and family trauma. Reviewers called it an honest, brutal, but strangely hopeful exploration of the space between blood and belonging. I was invited to speak at panels, to discuss the story behind the story. I declined most of them, because there were things I had said on screen that I had not yet found the courage to say aloud. But then came the call that would shift everything. It was early March. My brother Matthew phoned, an unusual event in itself. "Anna, Dad collapsed this morning. He was at home. Mom called 911. He's stable, but they're running tests." A wave of numbness swept over me. Do they know what it is? Some kind of neurological episode. Minor stroke, they think. He's conscious, but different. Different how? Quiet. Not angry, not defensive, just quiet. I asked nothing more. I ended the call and sat still for a long time. My thoughts were not of his fragility, nor his age, but of the terrifying realization that some reckonings do not come through confrontation, they arrive through collapse. My father's body had finally done what his mind never could, surrendered. I drove to the hospital the next morning. I told no one I was coming. I needed no audience. I needed no script. I entered the room as quietly as I had left his house 3 months earlier. He was sitting up, pale and leaner than I remembered. The IV dripped beside him, rhythmic and steady. A copy of The New Yorker lay unread on the table. The box was not there. He looked at me. Not with contempt. Not with discomfort. With a kind of recognition I had never seen in him. "You came," he said. His voice was gravel and air. "I heard." He nodded slowly. "The doctors say I was lucky." "You were," I replied. There was a pause, then, "But I don't feel lucky." I sat down in the chair across from him. He looked at his hands as though unfamiliar with them. "You told the world about me." I tensed, ready for another accusation, but it didn't come. Instead, and I listened, not just once. I listened. He looked up, and for the first time in my life, my father, the man who had raised me in emotional austerity, had tears in his eyes. Not from pain, from recognition. "You were always trying to speak. I just didn't know how to hear you." I said nothing. The silence was enough. "I was wrong," he said. 3 words, soft, uncloaked, human. They didn't fix everything. They didn't erase years of neglect or undo the fractures that had shaped my identity. But they cracked something open. He reached for something on the nightstand, a small printed photograph, the one from the box. "I don't remember that day," he said, "but I remember the way you looked at me. Like I was your whole world." "You were," I whispered. He nodded again, then lowered his gaze. "I failed you." I leaned forward, resting my hand gently over his. "But you can still choose not to finish the story that way." His breath trembled. For a long time, neither of us moved. In that moment, the past had not disappeared, but it had paused, long enough for something new to begin, or at least attempt to. But could a man who had built his entire life on control ever learn how to love without condition? And was I ready to accept that love, even after all the years without it? Spring came slowly that year. In Los Angeles, the trees bloomed early, but the skies remained gray for weeks, as if the weather, too, was uncertain whether the season had truly changed. I visited my father every Saturday, not out of obligation, but because something in the air between us had shifted. Not drastically, not miraculously, but enough to breathe without tension. The hospital eventually discharged him. He was sent home with medication, a neurologist's schedule, and a list of precautions that he largely obeyed. My mother rearranged the furniture to make it easier for him to move around. My brothers visited occasionally, but the dynamic between them and our father remained unchanged. Polite, functional, slightly performative. With me, however, the silence had evolved. It was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. Fragile, unfinished, but real. One afternoon in April, I brought him the DVD copy of the full first season of my show. He took it into his hands carefully, as though holding something sacred or radioactive. "Do you want me to watch it alone?" he asked. "You can. Or we can watch it together." He said nothing. That evening, he called my mother into the living room and, without a single word of explanation, inserted the disc into the player. He didn't speak through the first episode, nor the second. By the third, I noticed something change. He no longer watched the screen the way most viewers do. He watched with a quiet reverence, like a man at confession, hearing his sins spoken back to him in another voice. When the episode ended, the one where the father character attempts an apology, only to realize that an apology without understanding is nothing but a performance, he paused the video and turned to me. "I did that once," he said. "Said I was sorry, but didn't mean it. Just wanted the tension gone." I nodded. No response was needed. "Do you believe me now?" he asked quietly. "When I say I was wrong?" I looked at him, not as a daughter seeking validation, but as a woman who had learned to live without it. "I don't need to believe it," I said. "I just need to see you live it." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once pointed at my report cards in disappointment, that had signed checks but withheld affection, that had held me only in photographs but rarely in person. "Then I will try," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed him. Over the following months, my father changed not through grand gestures but through the smallest of things. The way he waited for me to speak before responding, the way he asked about my work with genuine curiosity, not filtered through judgment or comparison. He even began to write, a practice he once dismissed as a hobby for people with too much emotion. Simple reflections, a journal, nothing artistic, nothing poetic. But the effort itself was profound. One day he handed me a folded page from his notebook. No preface, no speech. It read, "I used to believe that control was the same as love, that to shape my children into success was to protect them. But control is fear in disguise. And love is the opposite of fear. I know that now, and I'm sorry it took me your whole childhood to learn it." I cried. Silently, not out of sadness, but because I never expected to receive words like that from the man who had taught me how to remain quiet in the face of pain. That December, 1 year after the infamous toast, we all gathered again at the family home. The table was as beautiful as always, candlelight flickering, silver polished, music soft in the background. But this time, the room felt warmer in a way I couldn't quite explain. Less staged, less fragile. When my father stood to give the traditional toast, I braced myself. Muscle memory. He raised his glass. "To my children," he began, "all 3 of them, who each took a different road, but all of whom brought me home in their own way." He looked at me. "And to Anna, the one who had the courage to teach her father how to feel." No one spoke. Not because they were shocked, but because somehow this time, the silence meant something different. After dinner, he approached me quietly. "There's something I want to show you." We went to his study. On the far wall, where once hung degrees and corporate plaques, now hung a single photograph, enlarged and framed. It was the one from the box. I looked at it, then at him. "You really kept it?" He nodded. "It reminds me of what I almost lost, what I still have time to protect." I moved back to Santa Barbara the following spring. Not permanently, but often enough to be present. We built new rituals, weekend walks, reading pages from my new script aloud, sitting in the backyard in comfortable silence. He grew quieter over time, not from age, but from peace. And I did too. Because forgiveness, I learned, is not a moment. It's a long, slow act of trust, one that requires both people to keep showing up. We never said "I love you" much, but love, I discovered, lives better in what is done than in what is said.